Have you ever noticed the people with the biggest hearts are usually the ones sitting alone at night? Not because nobody wanted them, but because they kept giving parts of themselves away until there was almost nothing left. And the terrifying part? Most empaths don't even realize they're being emotionally drained until they wake up one day feeling disconnected from their own soul. You answer messages instantly while nobody answers your silent pain. You overthink every shift in someone's energy because your nervous system learned that love can disappear without warning. You became the therapist, the peacemaker, the emotional shock absorber for everyone around you. And somehow, you still ended up alone. Because the truth nobody says out loud is this: deep feelers attract damaged people. Damaged people know exactly how to feed on empathy. That's why the empath walks alone. Not because they're weak, but because after enough betrayal, solitude starts feeling safer than attachment. And if you've been carrying invisible emotional wounds for years, if you've loved people who only loved your healing, if you've been abandoned right after giving someone your entire heart, this message is for you. Because tonight, someone finally understands the pain you never learned how to explain. There's something deeply tragic about an empath, not the sensitivity, not the emotions. The tragedy is that empaths are usually raised to believe their worth comes from how much pain they can tolerate. Read that again. Somewhere in your life, probably very early, you learned that love required emotional sacrifice. Maybe your household was chaotic. Maybe affection was inconsistent. Maybe you had to read people's moods just to feel emotionally safe. So your brain adapted. You became hyperaware. You learned micro-expressions, tone changes, emotional shifts, energy fluctuations. You became emotionally intelligent not because life was peaceful, but because survival demanded it. And that's why toxic people feel strangely familiar to empaths. Because chaos feels like home. A healthy person says, "I don't want to hurt you." A wounded empath says, "I can heal you." That sentence alone destroys lives. Because empaths don't fall in love with reality. They fall in love with potential. And potential is dangerous. Potential makes you stay after disrespect. Potential makes you excuse manipulation. Potential makes you romanticize inconsistency. You tell yourself, they're just scared. They've been hurt. They don't know how to love. Meanwhile, your nervous system is slowly collapsing under emotional exhaustion. And the cruelest part, empaths usually suffer in silence because the same person who comforts everyone has no idea how to ask for comfort themselves. So they isolate, not because they hate people, because they're tired of bleeding for people who call it love. You know what nobody tells empaths? Your ability to understand pain does not obligate you to stay inside someone else's darkness. That person who only calls when they're broken, but disappears when you need support, that person who gives mixed signals, then blames you for caring too much, that person who drains your emotional energy and calls it complicated, they are not confused. They are comfortable receiving love they never intend to reciprocate. And empaths struggle with this truth because they project their own heart onto other people. You think, if I would never hurt someone like this, they probably don't mean to hurt me either. But predators survive by finding people who cannot imagine cruelty. That's why emotionally manipulative people are drawn to empaths. Because empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. And eventually, the empath reaches a breaking point, a terrifying emotional awakening. The moment they realize, I kept trying to save people who enjoyed watching me drown. That realization changes you forever. You stop romanticizing emotional suffering. You stop chasing closure from emotionally unavailable people. You stop explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding you. And suddenly, you become harder to access, quieter, more distant. People think the empath became cold, number. The empath finally became aware that not everyone deserves access to their heart, aware that emotional availability is sacred, aware that being needed is not the same thing as being loved. And this next part might be the hardest truth you'll ever hear. Some people only loved you because you abandoned yourself for them. They loved your forgiveness, your patience, your emotional labor, your softness. But the second you created boundaries, they called you selfish. Because toxic people don't fear losing you. They fear losing control over you. That's why the empath eventually walks alone. Because solitude becomes the place where their nervous system can finally breathe. No manipulation. Elation. No emotional guessing games. No begging for consistency. No shape-shifting to keep people comfortable. Just silence. And for the first time in their life, silence feels safe. But healing as an empath is strange, because you don't miss the people. You miss the emotional fantasy you created around them. You miss who you hoped they would become. That's why letting go feels like grieving someone who never fully existed. And that grief is brutal, because empaths don't love halfway. They attach memories to music, energy to places, meaning to small moments. You remember the way they looked at you during vulnerable conversations, the late-night talks, the feeling of being emotionally seen for a brief moment, and your heart keeps replaying those fragments, trying to convince you the connection was real. But emotional intensity is not always emotional safety. Sometimes trauma creates stronger attachment than love itself, and that's what destroys empaths. They confuse them. Emotional depth with emotional health. Just because someone made you feel intensely does not mean they were meant for you. Sometimes your soul reacts strongly because your wounds recognize something familiar. That's not fate, that's conditioning. And when the empath finally understands this, their entire life changes. Because they stop asking, "How do I make people stay?" And they start asking, "Why was I abandoning myself to keep people who never chose me fully?" That question changes everything. Because the healed empath becomes unstoppable, dangerously self-aware. They no longer chase, no longer beg, no longer over-explain. Their empathy becomes wisdom instead of self-sacrifice, and people notice the shift immediately. The empath who once tolerated emotional breadcrumbs now walks away at the first sign of disrespect. The empath who once answered every midnight crisis call now protects their peace without guilt. The empath who once confused loneliness with failure now understands solitude can be sacred, because walking alone is not punishment. Sometimes it's recovery. Sometimes it's the soul rebuilding itself after years of emotional war. And yes, it gets lonely. Healing always gets lonely before it gets beautiful. Because when you stop overgiving, many people disappear. When you stop chasing, silence exposes who truly valued you. And for a while, you will question yourself. You'll wonder if becoming emotionally unavailable would hurt less. But don't lose your softness. This world desperately needs people who feel deeply. The goal is not to become cold. The goal is to stop offering your heart to people who treat it casually. There's a massive difference. A healed empath still loves deeply, but now they pay attention to patterns instead of promises. They observe energy instead of words. They stop trying to rescue people committed to their own dysfunction. And most importantly, they finally realize they were never too much. They were simply giving their deepest love to people incapable of receiving it responsibly. That realization frees you, because your sensitivity was never the curse. Your lack of boundaries was. And once an empath learns boundaries, their entire presence changes. They stop shrinking themselves to fit emotionally immature people. They stop apologizing for needing honesty, consistency, depth, real connection, and suddenly, the loneliness starts transforming into peace. Not empty peace, earned peace. The kind that comes after surviving emotional chaos for years. The kind that comes after finally choosing yourself. So if you've been walking alone lately, if you've been distancing yourself, questioning people, protecting your energy more than usual, maybe you're not broken. Maybe your soul is finally learning the difference between connection and attachment. Maybe you're finally realizing that your empathy is valuable and not everyone deserves access to it. And maybe, just maybe, walking alone right now is preparing you for the first healthy love of your life. The kind where you don't have to overthink texts. The kind where your nervous system feels calm instead of addicted to chaos. The kind where love doesn't feel like emotional survival. Until then, protect your heart. Not everyone who understands your pain deserves access to your soul. And never forget this. The deepest people often walk alone because shallow connections can no longer hold them. If this video found you during a painful season of your life, I hope it reminded you of something important. Your sensitivity is not weakness. Your heart is not foolish for loving deeply. And your loneliness does not mean you are unlovable. Sometimes, the strongest souls spend time alone because they are learning how to stop abandoning themselves for broken people. Thank you for being here. And if this message spoke to the part of you that nobody else sees, subscribe quietly, because we are still people in this world who understand the emotions you never say out loud.